drags black woman from first class, then she gets a call that changes everything. Have you ever had a moment that felt completely ordinary, only to realize later that it was the turning point of your entire life? Arielle Monroe had no idea that her short flight from Atlanta to Seattle would become more than just a business trip. It would be the silent earthquake that shook an entire system to its core. It was a sweltering Tuesday afternoon, and Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport buzzed with the usual noise. The rhythmic roll of suitcases over polished tile, announcements echoing through the speakers, and the murmur of rushed conversations. Arielle moved briskly through the crowd, suitcase in hand, her soft lavender cardigan fluttering gently behind her. At 32, Arielle embodied quiet confidence. She wasn't famous, but people often turned to look when she walked by. Not just because of her deep brown skin and elegant frame, but because of her presence. The kind that made you feel she knew exactly who she was. As the marketing director of a rising tech startup in Atlanta, her job took her across the country, pitching, seeking investments, expanding reach. But today's flight wasn't like the others. This was the most important trip of her year, where she'd present her project to a powerful group of investors in Seattle, the kind who could put her company on the map of Silicon Valley. And today, after months of racking up points and saving up, Arielle had finally been upgraded. A first-class seat on NorthJet Airlines. A small reward for the sleepless nights and the kind of non-stop life that made you forget to breathe. A moment she allowed herself to simply enjoy. She was dressed smartly yet comfortably. Black slacks, a crisp white blouse, and her lavender cardigan draped over her shoulders, ready for the chill of the airplane cabin. She checked her phone, no new messages from her mom or her boss, then turned toward the security line. The queue stretched long, filled with business travelers, tourists, and a few elderly passengers fumbling with their paperwork. Arielle offered a warm smile as she helped an older couple sort theirs out, a habit of hers, being kind even when no one was watching. At the gate, she spotted the familiar NorthJet aircraft through the glass. A sleek, blue and white Boeing 757. It was her first time flying first class on a nearly 5-hour journey, and her heart fluttered with the kind of quiet joy that only personal milestones bring. She considered grabbing a latte from a nearby coffee stand, but heard the call. First-class passengers, you're welcome to board now. Not wanting to miss her chance to settle in early, Arielle joined the priority line. A few heads turned as she walked up. Some people stared, as if trying to figure out, who is she? A celebrity maybe? She responded with a polite smile and kept moving forward. At the boarding bridge, a flight attendant welcomed her with a smile and directed her to seat 3A, the window seat in the front row. Arielle nodded gratefully, stowed her carry-on in the overhead bin, and eased into the plush leather chair. She pulled out her phone, snapped a picture of the luxurious cabin, wide seats, extra legroom, and sent it to her sister with a caption. Finally made it to first class. Fingers crossed the food's good. Another flight attendant brought her a glass of chilled water. Arielle thanked her, took a sip, and leaned back. Her mind was tired after days of rehearsing her pitch, but in that moment, everything felt calm. Peaceful, even. She didn't know that in less than 30 minutes, her world would be torn apart. That the seat she had proudly photographed would become the center of a national firestorm. That her name would flood the news cycles, tied to one painful hashtag, flying while black. The engines began to hum softly as more passengers boarded. Arielle glanced around. Most were quiet, wearing headphones or scrolling through their phones. Then she noticed a man in a police uniform enter the cabin. She didn't think much of it. Officers flew all the time, sometimes on duty, sometimes not. But this man, Officer Logan Maddox, didn't take a seat. Instead, he stopped in the first-class section and began whispering to a flight attendant. Arielle couldn't hear what was being said, but she saw the attendant's expression shift, confused, uncertain, as if unsure how to respond. Then suddenly, Maddox pointed directly at Arielle. She frowned. Why is he pointing at me? Before she could ask, he started striding toward her, his eyes sharp and cold. You need to leave this seat, he said, voice low but loaded with authority. Arielle blinked. Excuse me, this is my seat. I have a first-class ticket, 3A. His jaw tightened. This seat isn't for you. There's an open one in economy. Move, now. Ariel's heart pounded in her chest. She knew this wasn't normal. No one gets asked to leave their first-class seat like this. Not when they have a valid ticket, boarded properly, and had done absolutely nothing wrong. But what chilled her wasn't the words. It was his hand, slowly inching toward the gun on his hip. Ariel gripped the armrest, her palms ice cold. Her instincts screamed. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mix-up with the tickets. It wasn't a technical error. This was about power, about prejudice. A warning shot fired at 35,000 feet, a message that she didn't belong here. She took a deep breath, voice calm despite the storm inside her. I won't move unless someone from the airline confirms this is legitimate. Then she pulled out her phone, holding up the digital boarding pass on the screen. Clear as day, seat 3A. Ariel Monroe, first-class mistake. The officer, Logan Maddox, glanced at it, then growled, I don't need to see your ticket. I was told to remove you, and I'm not going to repeat myself. A flight attendant stood behind him, eyes wide, hands clenched at her sides. She stammered, Sir, she's a confirmed passenger. She's in the right seat. I checked her in personally. But Maddox wasn't listening. He'd made up his mind, not based on any policy, any logic, but on bias. Then everything happened too fast. Maddox suddenly lunged, grabbing Ariel's arm and yanking hard. Don't resist, he barked. She gasped in pain, jerking her arm back. What are you doing? Let go of me. I have a ticket. This is my seat. A scream rang through the cabin. A passenger shouted, Oh my God, he's dragging her out of her seat. Another pulled out their phone and hit record. Cameras started popping up. Eyes turned. The whole plane was watching. Ariel struggled to stay upright, but Maddox yanked again, throwing her to the aisle floor. Her hand slammed against the ground, shoulder twisting sharply as he dragged her toward the aircraft door, as if she were a criminal. She couldn't breathe. Not from pain, but from humiliation. Why? Because of my skin? Because I dared to sit in a seat they don't think I deserve. A flight attendant screamed, She has a valid ticket. She's a priority member. You have no right to do this. But Maddox didn't stop. His eyes were icy. He leaned close, whispering venom into her ear. Who do you think you are? People like you should know their place. Ariel turned her face toward him, eyes brimming with tears. What's your name? Maddox. Officer Maddox. She shouted into the chaos. Record this. His name is Officer Maddox. He assaulted me. He dragged me out of my seat, and I have a ticket. Flashes from phones lit up the air. Passengers rose from their seats, voices growing louder. Stop it. She didn't do anything wrong. This is abuse of power. An older woman in a tailored blazer stepped into the aisle, planting herself firmly between Maddox and the exit. You have no authority here. Show me your ID, your badge, and a legal reason. This is not a lawful removal. Maddox shoved past her and kept dragging Ariel through the jet bridge back toward the terminal. Her cardigan slipped off her shoulder. Her hair was wild, her shoulder throbbed from the rough handling. She couldn't breathe. All she felt was shame. Finally, a gate agent rushed in, Janelle Ortiz, the boarding area supervisor. Her voice cracked with disbelief. What are you doing? She has a ticket. She's a confirmed first-class passenger. Stop this now. Maddox froze for a second, his face flushed red. He released Ariel, who nearly collapsed against the cold metal wall. Her gasps echoed in the stunned silence. Janelle knelt beside her, voice gentle but trembling. Ms. Ariel, are you all right? We can take you back to your seat if you'd like. I'm so sorry. But Ariel couldn't answer right away. She leaned against the wall, clutching her shoulder, her whole body shaking. Back in the cabin, flight attendants and passengers flooded toward the door, faces a mixture of shock and fury. Maddox stood there, hands on hips, breathing heavily, but not a word of apology. A flight attendant shouted, He had no right. We verified. She is a confirmed passenger. And then something strange happened. No one gave the order. There was no signal. But one by one, every passenger in the cabin raised their phones, recording, taking notes, asking Ariel's name, asking for the officer's name. This was no longer just an incident on a plane. It had become a story the whole country would hear. And Ariel knew, deep down, she wasn't going to stay silent. Not this time. She lifted her head, eyes red but blazing with fire. I want real police. I'm filing charges, and I'm going to tell the whole world what just happened. Ariel sat on a bench just outside the boarding gate, wrapped in a thin blanket a flight attendant had handed her. Her shoulder still ached, a deep, throbbing pain. But the real wound was elsewhere, in her heart, in her pride, and in the eyes of every person who had watched her dragged from her seat like a criminal. A cluster of airline staff hurried to her side, surrounding her in a protective circle. Janelle Ortiz, the boarding manager, knelt in front of her. "Ms. Monroe, we are deeply sorry. Airport police are on their way. We've reported the incident, and we will support you in any way we can." Ariel gave a small nod, eyes locked on her phone screen. The first hashtag had already hit Twitter. Flying while black. Within 20 minutes, the video of her being pulled from her seat by Maddox had been uploaded from 3 different angles. Headlines in all caps flooded the timeline like screams. Black passenger dragged from first class, despite having a ticket. Officer ignores crew's pleas, abuses power. Watch this and do not stay silent. Ariel's phone began to vibrate nonstop. Her sister was calling, friends from college messaged her, her boss emailed, asking if she was okay. A few coworkers sent her just one word: "I saw." Unbelievable. She opened the screen, and there she was, her own face, mid-flight, being pulled from her seat. Her expression: pain, shock, disbelief. She closed the video. She couldn't watch. A few moments later, 2 uniformed officers from the airport police arrived, entirely different from Maddox. One knelt beside her, speaking gently. "Miss Monroe, we'd like to take your statement, and if you wish, you can file a formal complaint, right here and now." Ariel looked them dead in the eye, no longer trembling. "I want to press charges against Maddox. I want him prosecuted for assault, abuse of power, and racial discrimination." The officers took careful notes. One leaned toward the other, whispering that multiple witnesses had already agreed to submit videos and testimony. At that moment, a small group of local reporters had gathered at the gate, interviewing passengers, trying to confirm the identity of the woman in the video. A young woman approached, holding out her phone. "Excuse me? I was in row 6. I recorded everything, from start to finish. I'd like to send you the original file, so you have the full proof." Ariel nearly burst into tears. "Thank you. Thank you for not turning away." Meanwhile, a doctor from the airport's medical team arrived to examine her injuries. "Your right shoulder has been pulled hard. Possibly a ligament strain," he said. "I recommend rest and a soft brace, and if you'd like, I can write up a medical report now." Ariel nodded. As social media roared louder, NorthJet's PR team began to react. Janelle returned, voice lower but firm. "Corporate is watching the situation closely, and the CEO would like to speak with you." Ariel raised an eyebrow. "The airline's CEO? Directly?" "Yes, he wants to call you, but only if and when you're ready." Ariel wasn't ready. She pulled out her phone and opened Twitter. Within less than an hour, her name was trending on multiple news outlets. The video of Maddox dragging her from her seat was going viral. Civil rights advocates, lawyers, and even a few politicians were speaking out. This is why Black Americans never feel safe, even when they follow every rule. This is a blatant symptom of a broken system. Ariel's phone buzzed with a new email. She opened it. From a civil rights attorney named Julian Carter, known for high-profile police misconduct cases. Subject line: "I'm here if you're ready to fight." Ariel leaned back against the seat, closed her eyes. Everything was spinning. But in the middle of the storm, one thing was crystal clear. She wasn't backing down. She wasn't going to let this humiliation be buried beneath a half-hearted apology. That night, as evening news anchors began broadcasting under headlines like "Racial Profiling at 30,000 feet, Victim Speaks Out," Ariel knew her fight for dignity was only just beginning. 6 a.m. the next morning. The sky over Seattle was overcast, light rain tapping gently against the hotel window. Ariel Monroe sat at the edge of the bed, her right shoulder secured in a soft sling, a half-full cup of coffee tilted in her hand. She hadn't slept. Her dreams had been fragmented and restless, filled with shouting, hateful stares, and the memory of being yanked from her seat like a sack of luggage. She unlocked her phone, hundreds of unread messages, emails flooding in, her name still trending across the nation. Her sister had messaged, "None of us will stay silent, we're taking him down." A journalist offered an exclusive interview. A civil rights organization volunteered to sponsor her legal case. But one email stood out above the chaos. From the office of Kenneth Blake, CEO of NorthJet Airlines. Subject line, request for direct call, timing at your discretion. Ariel closed her eyes for a few seconds. She wasn't sure she was ready, but this was the voice the entire system ran on, or was complicit with. The voice of real power. She responded simply, I can take the call at 8:15 a.m. Pacific time. 8:15 a.m. The phone rang. Caller ID, unknown number. She answered, Miss Monroe, this is Kenneth Blake, Chief Executive Officer of NorthJet Airlines. Thank you for taking this call. First and foremost, I want to offer you my deepest and most personal apology for the horrific event that took place yesterday. His voice was low, measured, the kind that had weathered hundreds of boardroom crises and thousands of press briefings. Ariel replied, holding back her anger. I'm still furious, Mr. Blake. My shoulder is injured. I was dragged in front of 100 people, and now the entire world is replaying that moment every hour. He paused, then spoke, You have every right to be angry, and I'm not here to defend the indefensible. What I saw in the footage and from our employees' reports is inexcusable. Maddox was an off-duty officer operating outside all boundaries of professionalism, legality, and basic human decency. Ariel tightened her grip on her cup. This wasn't just about humiliation. I was touched without consent, dragged like a criminal. If I had been a white woman with blonde hair, would that have happened? There was silence. Then Blake answered, his voice lower. No, and that's exactly the problem. We can't undo what happened, but we will not ignore it or sweep it under the rug. He continued, NorthJet will cover all of your medical expenses. Beyond that, we'd like to offer compensation for emotional damages, not as hush money, but as recognition. Most importantly, I want to ask, what do you need from us to feel respected again? Ariel inhaled deeply. I don't need a check to buy my silence. I need the system to change. I want real actions, not some PR statement written by 5 lawyers in a room. Blake didn't object. We've already contacted the Transportation Security Administration and the Airport Police Department. Maddox has been suspended from duty, and as of this morning, he is permanently banned from all NorthJet flights. Ariel blinked. She hadn't expected that level of decisiveness. What about the crew on yesterday's flight? Some of them tried to speak up and were ignored. They've been offered counseling and follow-up training. Many of them were shaken. Some cried while writing their reports. They won't be punished for standing with you. In fact, we're thanking them for it. He paused, then added, and finally, if you choose to speak publicly, we will support you. We won't censor you, edit your words, or spin your story. You're the center of this. We're here to listen. Ariel said nothing. There was something in his voice that made her believe, at least for now, that this apology wasn't entirely performative. I'll speak with my attorney before making any decisions. That's absolutely fair. I look forward to hearing from you when you're ready. The call ended. Ariel set the phone down. Her mind swirled with questions. Compensation? An apology? Concrete actions? All of it mattered, but something else ran deeper. Dignity, truth, and justice. Not just for herself, but for the thousands who had suffered the same indignity in silence. Just then, a breaking news alert popped up. A local news station in Alabama had uncovered that Logan Maddox had been investigated 3 times for violence against black individuals and cleared each time. Ariel's blood turned cold. He wasn't an accident. He was a symptom of a system long infected. And she might just be the first one to blow it wide open. News spread like wildfire. Less than 12 hours after the call from CEO Kenneth Blake, the homepages of 3 major news networks lit up with bold red banners. Officer Logan Maddox's long history of misconduct exposed. 5 allegations in 7 years, 0 accountability. Ariel sat on the edge of the hotel couch, the glow of her laptop screen casting a pale reflection onto her tense face. A special report was airing. The anchor began in a solemn tone. The incident aboard the NorthJet flight is not the first time Officer Maddox has used excessive force. What's even more disturbing is how long the system protected him. His record appeared on screen. 2017, accused of striking a black teenager on the head with a baton during a traffic stop. 2019, a Latina woman claimed he shoved her to the ground in a public park for sitting in the wrong area. 2021, allegedly pulled a gun on a delivery worker while demanding ID verification. All cases were handled internally. No disciplinary action, no independent review, no justice. Ariel felt like she'd been punched in the gut. She wasn't the first, she was just the one caught on camera. And then, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Miss Monroe? My name is Darius Hall. I'm one of the people Maddox assaulted. I heard about what you're doing. And I don't want you to fight this alone." Darius's voice was quiet, but resolute. 2 years ago, he said, Maddox pulled him out of his car for not using a turn signal, even though he insisted he had. Maddox punched him, threatened to throw him in the cage if he filed a complaint. He did file one, but it disappeared. The police chief later called him directly and advised him to let it go for his future. His voice cracked. "I stayed quiet, but when I saw him dragging you out of that seat, I saw myself. If I had spoken up sooner, maybe this wouldn't have happened to you." Ariel didn't respond immediately. Tears slipped silently down her cheek, not from pain, but because for the first time, she knew she wasn't alone. Within the next 24 hours, 6 more victims reached out, through email, Instagram, Facebook. A mother, an elementary school teacher, a college student, a trans woman, all had been humiliated by Maddox in silence. Ariel saved every message, every photo, every scanned complaint form. That night, her civil rights attorney Julian Carter called via video chat. "Ariel, these testimonies, they're gold. They prove this isn't isolated. This is a pattern of abuse protected by a system. We're not just suing Maddox anymore. We're suing the entire East Haven Police Department for enabling and covering up his misconduct." Ariel looked at her reflection in the webcam, hair neatly tied, shoulders still in a sling. She was no longer the woman pulled from her seat. She was the voice for everyone who'd ever been silenced. As Julian finished speaking, Ariel asked softly, "If we win, what will change?" Julian answered without hesitation, "Policies, personnel, culture, but more importantly, there'll be thousands of people who finally believe they don't have to suffer alone." That night, for the first time since the incident, Ariel posted on Twitter, "My name is Ariel Monroe. I had a first-class ticket. I was dragged from my seat because of my skin color, but I will not quietly exit this system as a victim. I'm standing up, and this time, no one's voice will be erased." The tweet soared past 100,000 shares in just 3 hours. One reply read, "They tried to break one person, but they woke up an entire generation." It was dusk. Ariel was in the middle of a Zoom call with her attorney, Julian Carter, when her phone pinged, a new email, from Michelle Langston. Subject, "I used to be friends with his ex-wife, and I can't stay silent anymore." Ariel frowned slightly, then clicked it open. "Dear Ariel, my name is Michelle. I used to be close friends with Logan Maddox's ex-wife. We lost touch years ago, but I kept certain materials she was too afraid to release. When I saw him drag you from that seat, I knew it was time to break the silence. If you're open to it, I'd like to meet in person. I'll bring everything, emails, photos, recordings, and her journal entries." Ariel sat still for a long moment. This could be the key. She replied within 10 minutes, setting a time and place for the next morning, a small cafe on the outskirts of Atlanta. She had returned home to prepare for her upcoming press conference. 9 a.m. Michelle Langston arrived. Petite, frail, with tired eyes and a thick yellow envelope clutched tightly in her hands. She spotted Ariel instantly. Her gaze didn't waver, only softened, full of empathy. "I'm so sorry for what you went through," she said softly. "He's done this to others. I can't look away anymore." They sat. Michelle opened the envelope. Inside were printed emails between Maddox and a fellow officer, filled with explicit, racist language. Photographs of bruises and injuries on his ex-wife's arm, along with an internal complaint form, dismissed for lack of evidence. An audio recording of Maddox threatening her. "I've got friends in the department. You'll disappear before anyone gives a damn." Ariel's hands clenched. Michelle's voice trembled. She tried to report him. She begged for help, but every door was slammed shut. They called her too emotional, unstable, and eventually she went silent. I stayed silent with her. But this time, I can't. Ariel gently touched her hand. "What you did was brave, and you're not alone anymore." That same afternoon, Julian received the full packet of evidence and immediately began filing it into their case records. He called Ariel just hours later. "This is a critical blow. These materials don't just prove misconduct, They expose the network that protected Maddox. If we can establish that, this case won't just be personal, it'll be systemic. As word of Michelle's testimony and the damning files leaked to the press, national networks broke in with breaking news alerts. One headline went viral: "Secrets in the Shadows. Officer Maddox's ex-wife once begged for help and was ignored." The internet erupted. Women's rights groups, civil rights organizations, legal advocates from across the U.S. took to social media. This is no longer about one act of violence. This is about a machine that crushes women, people of color, and the vulnerable. Ariel received 2 more emails that night. One from a trans individual, saying Maddox once forced them out of a public park for inappropriate attire. Another from a black teenage boy, recounting how Maddox once pointed a gun at his head for looking suspicious. She saved each word, logged each name. That evening, when the world finally fell quiet, Ariel sat alone in the living room of her parents' house. Her mother came in quietly, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You don't have to save the world, Ariel." Ariel smiled faintly, but her eyes burned with quiet fire. "No, Mama, but if I don't do something, who'll be the next one dragged from their seat, ripped from their right to exist?" Atlanta District Court, 9:05 a.m. Outside the courtroom, a crowd of reporters, activists, and citizens packed the halls shoulder to shoulder. Inside, seated quietly in the front row, Ariel Monroe, a file in her hands, eyes steady, unflinching. It was time. After weeks of investigation, filings, and press coverage, the trial of Officer Logan Maddox was officially underway. Charges: aggravated assault, abuse of power, violation of civil rights, and intentional infliction of harm. But Ariel was no longer alone. Beside her sat Julian Carter, her steadfast attorney, hand gently over hers. Behind her were 6 former victims of Maddox, people who had once suffered in silence, now ready to stand and speak. The courtroom fell silent as the door opened. Logan Maddox entered. No uniform, no badge, just a man in a wrinkled suit, hollow-eyed, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Case 2481, the State of Georgia v. Logan Maddox, the clerk announced. The judge sat high above the chamber, eyes sharp as steel. The prosecution began laying out its evidence. The video of Maddox dragging Ariel from her first-class seat. Eyewitness statements from crew members confirming Ariel's valid ticket. Internal records revealing 5 prior complaints against Maddox, none publicly addressed. Then came the witnesses. First to take the stand, Ariel. She stood tall, eyes fixed on Maddox, who still couldn't bring himself to look up. Her voice was steady, unwavering. "I had a ticket. I followed every rule, and still I was dragged from my seat like a criminal. Not because I did something wrong, but because I am a black woman." She detailed every harrowing minute, the grip of his hand, the silence of the passengers, the moment she felt her dignity ripped away in full view of the public. The room went still. Next was Darius Hall, who testified about being beaten by Maddox during a traffic stop. "I tried to bury it, but when I saw him dragging Ariel, I couldn't stay quiet anymore." A 17-year-old boy took the stand. He described being pulled from a park and threatened with arrest for looking suspicious. Then came Michelle Langston. She brought printed emails, injury photos, and a chilling audio clip of Maddox threatening his ex-wife. He used to brag, "I've got friends in the department. No one can touch me." Maddox's defense tried to fight back. They questioned Ariel. "Did you challenge the officer's authority?" They suggested. "Could this have been a misunderstanding in protocol?" Ariel didn't flinch. "If this was a misunderstanding, then it's one rooted in a system that always misunderstands people like me." The courtroom was silent. Only the soft scribble of pens and the judge's tapping gavel echoed through the chamber. After 3 days of testimony, the trial moved to closing arguments. Then the jury was dismissed for deliberation. 6 hours later, they returned. The foreperson stood, verdict in hand. "We find the defendant, Logan Maddox, guilty on all counts: aggravated assault, abuse of power, motivated misconduct in the line of duty, infliction of physical and psychological harm on a civilian." Gasps filled the courtroom. A woman wept. Darius buried his face in his hands. Ariel bowed her head, gripping Julian's hand tightly. Justice, at last, had spoken. Maddox was sentenced to 6 years in prison with no parole for the first 4. As he was escorted out in handcuffs, heads bowed, the cameras turned to Ariel. A reporter called out, "Miss Monroe, do you have anything you'd like to say?" Ariel faced the lens, her voice calm, resolute. "He dragged me from my seat, but I will never let anyone drag me from the truth." 4 days after the historic trial, as Logan Maddox was officially transferred to a federal prison, Ariel Monroe stepped onto the stage at the National Civil Justice Conference to a standing ovation. She wasn't a politician, she wasn't a professional activist, she was a black woman who had simply wanted to fly to Seattle for a business presentation. But that day, she stood before 1,200 people, lawyers, journalists, students, survivors, mothers, fathers, holding a microphone, carrying the most resonant story in America that week. "I used to think that staying quiet was the way to avoid trouble. I used to believe that if I dressed properly, spoke politely, and sat in the seat I paid for, I'd be treated with respect. But then, I was dragged from my seat like I didn't belong. And I realized no one is immune to injustice, no matter how perfectly they play by the rules." She paused. Her eyes met hundreds of others, still listening, remembering. "And I also realized, if I didn't speak up, the next one could be my little sister, my nephew, a little girl who just wants to sit in peace on the flight of her life." After her speech, Ariel was invited to speak on national television, CNN, MSNBC, ABC. She wasn't a trained spokesperson, but every word she said carried something no training could replace: lived experience, real pain, and honest rebirth. In a special segment with Anderson Cooper, he asked her, "Do you see yourself as a symbol?" Ariel smiled gently, shook her head. "I'm a survivor. But if someone sees a part of themselves in me, then I'll keep standing here, and I'll speak on their behalf." In the following weeks, a wave of calls for reform swept the country. NorthJet Airlines issued a new policy, revoking all off-duty officers' right to carry weapons on flights unless tied to a verified, lawful purpose. Other major airlines, Skylux, AeroGlobal, Crown Atlantic, followed, revising protocols around misconduct and abuse of authority in flight. A new coalition was formed, Every Seat Has a Story, founded by Ariel herself, aimed at supporting victims of discrimination in public service industries. Ariel also spoke at a state congressional hearing in Georgia. She stood tall, between wooden benches and blinding overhead lights, and told her story. From the moment she was pulled from her seat to the moment she stood in court to hear the verdict. There was no exaggeration, no skipped detail, just truth, and the belief that truth deserves to be heard. Then something no one expected happened. A 12-year-old boy from New Jersey wrote her a letter by hand. "I'm black too. I'm scared people won't like me because of my skin. But when I saw you on TV, I thought I don't have to hide anymore. Thank you, you're my hero." Ariel cried, not from pain, but because for the first time in her life she realized her voice had saved a small soul from enduring the same silence she once had to survive. And through all the lights, the applause, and the praise, Ariel held one truth closest to her heart. She wasn't fighting to be celebrated. She was fighting so the next person wouldn't have to fight at all. 3 months after the trial, Ariel received a special invitation to deliver the opening keynote at the International Aviation Conference in Chicago, where senior leaders from over 40 global airlines would gather. She wasn't a pilot, she wasn't an engineer, she wasn't a CEO. She was a woman who had once been dragged from a first-class seat, and from that moment had forced an entire industry to sit down and look at itself. That day, the Grand Convention Hall was silent. No flashy intro, no dramatic music. Only Ariel, walking slowly to the podium, holding a framed photo in her hands. A photo of seat 3A, the seat she had once been pulled from. She placed it on the lectern and began. "This is a seat. But it's also more than just a seat. It marks a moment when a person's dignity was violated. Because of skin color, because of bias, because of silence that lasted far too long. But from this very seat I was lifted, not by the hands that dragged me down, but by the invisible hands of millions, the once silent, the no longer silent, and those who, for the first time in their lives, believed they had the right to sit down and be seen as human." The room erupted in applause. Kenneth Blake, CEO of NorthJet, the same man who had once called to apologize, stepped onto the stage with a plaque in his hands. For turning pain into progress, for turning a seat into a symbol the world now recognizes. NorthJet Airlines is proud to name our newest training initiative, the Ariel Standard, the gold standard for equity and dignity in air travel. Not long after, Ariel was invited to join a federal advisory board tasked with overseeing investigations into discrimination across public sectors. She wasn't just telling her story anymore. She was writing policy. She wasn't just featured in headlines. She now sat at the table where change was made. 1 year later, a small monument was unveiled in the central atrium of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the very place where it had all begun. It wasn't a statue of Ariel. It was a first-class seat, mounted in bronze with an inscription etched beneath, for everyone who was ever told they didn't belong. On the day of the unveiling, an 8-year-old girl held her mother's hand as they approached the display. She tilted her head up and asked, "Mommy, who sat in that seat before?" Her mother smiled gently, knelt down, and whispered, "A woman." She was pulled from that seat. But then she stood up and made the whole world sit down and listen. Ariel Monroe, once just a passenger on a flight she never finished, had become a living legacy of resilience, justice, and human dignity. She didn't choose the fight, but when she was thrust into the center of it, she did not back down. Some flights last only a few hours, but their consequences can echo for a lifetime. Ariel Monroe wasn't just pulled from a seat, she was pulled from safety, from trust in a system. But in return, she pulled an entire industry into the mirror of truth. One seat, one woman, and a wave that could no longer be stopped. If this story moved you, share it. Comment the name of the strongest woman you know, and remember, even the smallest voice can shake the foundations of a system. Thank you for following the journey of Ariel Monroe, a powerful reminder that justice doesn't come from silence, but from those who dare to rise even after being pulled down. If you believe that one voice can spark a wave of change, hit like, share this story, and subscribe to Aiva Stories for more real, powerful, and deeply human journeys. Tap the bell so you don't miss the next story the world needs to hear, because justice doesn't happen on its own. It's built by us.